need the microphone.
So ready?
Good morning, Tomas. I'm Mimi Merlin.
Are we ready? Good morning. I'm Mike Zaporowski, and we'd like to welcome you to the Church of the Holy Spirit in Lake Forest, Illinois. We have a pretty small and brave in-person group, but I know there's a much greater group of individuals on Zoom, the live streaming. This is our 124th session of the Faith at Work ministry, which we started back in 2009. It is my great pleasure to say welcome to my friend all the way from Sweden, Tomas Brunegård. Tomas, good morning or good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. As we normally do, we start with a prayer. Father Luke is out of town today. So I've asked Mimi Merle, so I guess your mother Mimi this morning, to do this morning's prayer.
Good morning, everybody. It's a pleasure to be across the world with Tomas here in Lake Forest. And in this season of Lent, I read some words that come from Pope Francis, and I think they give us a chance to think about this time of reflection and contemplation. Fast from hurting words and say kind words. Fast from sadness and be filled with gratitude. Fast from anger and be filled with patience. Fast from pessimism and be filled with hope. Fast from worries and have trust in God. Fast from complaints, contemplate simplicity. Fast from pressures and be prayerful. Fast from bitterness, fill your hearts with joy. Fast from selfishness and be compassionate. Fast from grudges and be reconciled. Fast from words, be silent and listen. Heavenly Father, we thank you for this day. In Jesus' name, we lift up this session with Mike and Tomas. Amen.
Mimi, thank you very much for that. Wonderful. Before introducing Tomas, as a quick reminder, we typically do only 3 things in those sessions. Discuss the person's background, his or her life faith journeys, and importantly, how they bring faith to work. As we know, God has us do his work, many different professions and very different individuals, and that's what we've had throughout this ministry. And today is going to be as unique of a discussion as any. Hopefully you've seen Thomas's bio. I'm going to do it really quickly before what I know is going to be a very rich discussion. But Tom was born and still resides in Sweden. He lives there with his wife Tina and 4 adult children. Thomas worked in the media industry for almost 30 years, serving as the CEO of the Stampin Group for 18 years, and also chairman of the World Association of Newspapers and News Publishers for 4 years. For someone with as deep of an open Christian faith, it's quite unusual to have that position in a secular Europe, particularly in the publishing world. Thomas was also involved in the Halftime Institute. Both of us are very proud graduates of the Halftime Institute program. And as you're going to see, Tom has a strong and unwavering faith. And he's been active in spreading the word across many parts of Europe, Africa, Australia, and all over the world. Thomas and Tina have served with the Mission Aviation Fellowship, bringing their work to many parts of the world. And Thomas is also a author of 2 books, Mitt Val in Swedish, and also The Reason, which is available on Amazon. So I'm thrilled to welcome Tomas. Welcome to Faith at Work, Tomas. As we said, we'll probably go for about 35 or 40 minutes. Then we're going to open the floor for questions either from the in-person audience or from via Zoom, and people will be texting their questions. But I thought maybe the very first question is that how did faith impact you, particularly in the early life, and maybe some defining moments, Tomas?
Thank you. I just lost your picture, Mike, so I don't see you. I see myself twice now on the screen, but maybe you can correct that somewhere over there. Well, I grew up in a Christian home here in Sweden, and in a very small church setting. And we had, when I was a kid, we had the meetings or the church services at the town hall or the community center, which meant that there was no religious symbols whatsoever in our meeting places. And but this was a very close and very warm relationship, but it was suddenly interrupted by the Jesus movement or the Jesus people or the Jesus revolution, as you might have seen on the movies. It came around in the early 1970s when the Jesus people were not imported, but they were flown over from Newport Beach to a yearly summer conference that my church denomination had. And the old guy, he was over 90 years old. He had chartered an aircraft and brought these 120, I think it was, Jesus people to this church setting. And that meant that there was a thing happening with young people in the biggest cities, and it affected my small town. So about 50 in their 20s became Christian. I was 10 years old, and they were my brother's friends. They suddenly came to our church and became saved and free from drug abuse and whatever they did. But they had long hair, funny clothes, and everyone had a little bag over their shoulder. And I was 10 years old, and I got baptized together with the first guy in the community pool. The water was extremely cold. I can still remember it. It was like, in the 60s in the pool. But we were baptized, and in this community or the public pool that we were baptized in, it was filled with over 200 people from the town who came to see this, and there was a massive little mountain of shoes because people had to take off their shoes. And this experience of being a young kid, seeing that happen, has left me affected the rest of my life, because Jesus showed up in a massive way in this little environment, and it changed my life, and it changed actually the whole community for many, many years, what happened. So this was, when I watched the movie a couple of months ago, The Jesus Revolution, it spoke back into my life about those days and what it meant. And it was funny to see here in secular Sweden, where the movie wasn't actually brought into the country by the normal movie companies, but a private person took it in, and then it hit it was #1 of the film lists for several weeks, because the movie theaters were filled with people who wanted to see it. So that was the early days, and I think this affected the rest of my life. After that, I can never say that faith isn't real, Jesus isn't real, God is not real. This is happening, and it changes people's lives.
Tomas, after you and I spoke with lunch a couple of weeks ago, and I did watch the movie. I've seen many trailers. This is not to be promoting Hollywood movies, but if you've not seen it, it's called Jesus Revolution. Kelsey Grammer plays Pastor Chuck Smith. Happening in the 1970s, was a cover story of the Time magazine. It was just amazing how this small rundown church in California, they opened the doors to the young and disillusioned people, bringing the word of Jesus. And again, frankly, it was hard not to get emotional watching that. And I had no idea that they had actually gone all the way to many places in Europe, including in Sweden, bringing the word of how the. Anyway, I thank you for that very insightful and interesting background that also helped me. Again, every time I speak with someone, comes up quickly in discussions, encouraging them to watch it and to obviously to make their reflections on it. The next
Mike, before you continue, it's funny with this front page of, was it Life magazine or Time magazine, whatever it was that you had in the early 70s? The same, not the same picture, but an equivalent picture was on the German equivalent magazine, Die Stern, with Jesus on the front page just a few months ago. So it happens again.
Absolutely, absolutely. I'm dying to get into the discussions of your role in the media industry. Again, your strong faith journey to go along with media industry, publishing industry that's quite often liberal. But before that, I thought maybe you can walk us through what happened after you're 10 years old, your high school, college. You had a very interesting start to your business career, consulting, running a Burger King franchise in Sweden before the media. So maybe you can give us a quick summary of your quote-unquote life journey.
Okay. Well, I came through first military, where I served as an officer in reserve. It was the later days of the Cold War. I also served on the Swedish UN contingent to Cyprus for 6 months. Went through college or university and studied business. If there was some time, I think, when I stepped out of faith or really helped me shape my faith was in when I was in the military. That was like a walk through the desert, I think, and it shaped much my view on my Christian faith. Then I came through college, as I said. I got to work at the management consultant company with my teacher, and we worked with financial control of Swedish multinational companies. At the same time, because I had done a year in Hill City, South Dakota, as an exchange student when I was a senior in high school, I learned to love the Whopper. So and McDonald's was doing huge success over here in Europe. So we started Burger King in Scandinavia instead. I thought the burger was better. So I ended up, and we're now in the late 80s, early 90s, to work with Burger King because we invested quite a lot, this little tiny management consultant company. But then in the crisis of the early 90s, when everything nearly fell apart, we did a joint venture with Burger King Corporation, which was then owned by a British conglomerate called the Grand Metropolitan. And we did a joint venture. So I ended up working 3 years in the beginning of the 90s with Burger King and starting up Burger King businesses all over Sweden and Scandinavia.
So you were the CEO at age 29, right? When you first became running that franchises in Sweden?
Well, I was deputy CEO.
Oh, deputy, all right.
He put a British guy here who knew how to operate burgers, fries, and shakes, which I didn't know. I came out of the consultant industry.
And how did faith evolve after you started in the business world, Tomas?
I think then pretty much my faith knew, and that's not necessarily as my church view. I have to separate between my faith and my church. My faith was very solid after these years in the military and my teenage years. Also having been a year alone out in South Dakota had really shaped this faith environment. But of course then you start to lose faith, you could say, in your church and in those environments and how you do live out your faith. But I started as small groups with my student friends, and I think that helped me form also the view that faith actually progress and mature pretty much in these smaller environments, and that can also affect a church and help to shape a church. So I became very involved in church leadership when I was before the age of 30, and I was doing music and so on. So this was also became part of my life, as well as at the same time as I was doing a career in work.
You had mentioned there was a Pentecostal church, I believe, or music was a big part of both your family and the church.
Yeah, if I get you right now, Mike, we were in the church. We had a lot of music. We also had a lot of small groups, and at this time there was a lot of young people coming to the church, which I'm still part of, and that, of course, helped me. Not only my faith perspective, but also being part of leadership of church, and helped us transform the church at that stage. We are not talking about late 80s, early 90s. So I became very involved, and I also believed in the church, because what I've seen when I was a young guy and the Jesus people came around 20 years earlier, that helped me understand that the church is vital for a growing Christian community in a city or in neighborhoods or whatever. So this was important to me.
You guys just opened a brand new church, I think, last summer.
True. Well, last summer we just inaugurated in the new church in September. So we actually sold the building, which was built during the Second World War, when we were under not a siege, but the German fleet had put the blockage on our port, which is the biggest in Northern Europe, in the Nordic area. And so it was built with pretty poor material, and we were ending up with this view that should we renovate the old church or should we build a new one? And we built a completely brand new church. You can Google it, Smyrna Church in Gothenburg, and it's right in the middle of the Freeport, visible to everyone. It's twice as big as the old one we had.
I mean, it's a great role modeling of what's possible, bringing the right message and to be able to bring people close to the Word and to be actually growing the congregation. So back on this big question, how did you end up in the media industry in one of the most secular countries in the world? I mean, I love Sweden, by the way, but they're very secular. And again, the more I hear about your faith, just tell me, how did you start and how did you reconcile what's, at least on the surface, two completely different worlds?
Well, thank you, Mike, for loving my country. I love my country as well. So what happened was that I got a phone call one night from a search consultant and said that, do you want to start a discussion with a newspaper that needs a new CEO? I love media. I always wanted to be a journalist, but my grades were too low to get into school of journalism. So I got into business instead. And, but it's when they asked me, I came to see the board, and this was at an evening, at the day, I should say, when this newspaper, the tabloid, had its biggest scoop ever, and it was on Richard Gere was in swimming nude with a young Swedish girl in the south of Sweden, and they were caught by the photographers of the newspaper, and this became a big story. And when I had that discussion around the table, I said to them, this is not what I want to do in life. I don't want to be part of these kind of stories for the rest of my life. So I said, thank you, good discussion, but this is nothing for me. But walking out of that room with the board, I ended up with the grand old man of the Swedish newspaper industry who was on that board. And he was the chairman of another newspaper company which had interest in this tabloid. And we were standing on the curb outside waiting for taxis to go to the airport. And we had such a fruitful conversation because he had never met before a person with my background who was a Christian, who played dance band music. I play jazz band. And with the fast food experience or fast moving consumer goods experience as I had. So he got fascinated by that, and he called up the owner for the Gothenburg Post later on that evening and said, I found a new CEO for my company. And that ended up into my journey to one of the most prestigious jobs in the Swedish media industry.
So tell me, how did this thing start? I mean, you're 33 years old, you have a consulting and a Whopper, Burger King experience. You have a person of a deep faith, and in theory, you're a very serious journalist and writer. So tell me about, how did you introduce yourself to the group? I mean, I know you grew 5X over the next 15 years, but maybe those initial stages, again, leadership lessons and also your faith journey as well would be quite interesting to the audience.
Well, it's not hard to imagine how suspicious people were when I came through the doors. And I have to say that, of course, I was a young guy. I was pretty self-confident, but that doesn't take you very far when you walk into one of these major media houses of Sweden and you know that everyone is staring and thinking, what can this person do in this house? So I just knew one thing, that was I have to be totally transparent. I need to be totally transparent about who I am, where I come from, and what I stand for. And then I have to find people that I can trust in. So I started off by writing. This is in the days when email hadn't really cut through to all the people in the leadership. So we had billboards where you put an A4 piece of paper on. And I remember writing the first letter to all the staff in the company where I said, well, I come out of the hamburger industry, I come from a small town, Kina, and I'm a Christian. Because I needed to tell them this story because they would just look it up otherwise. And of course, this was a mind blow to many journalists. And I remember meeting our journalist staff, and there were about 350 of them, hardcore journalists. And we were sitting in the room, and I got the question, how much do you earn? And normally people in my environment, in our environment, will say, well, that's secret, or I can't tell you, or it's a secret between me and the company. But I thought for a millisecond, now comes transparency. I have to be transparent. So I said what my salary was, and I took that risk of being accused of being too high paid for such a young age. But that, afterwards, I realized that was the thing that cut through this environment between me and them in these initial days. So that was where I think God helped me in that way. Otherwise, it was just also that I needed to find people that I could trust. I knew I could trust the main owner, who was then also the editor-in-chief at that time for the newspaper. To recruit people around me that I trusted, and that, of course, to rely on people with the expertise in the industry was it was not a matter of survival just, but it was also a matter of how would we work for the next 17 years in order we trusted each other. And that was very successful.
This is obviously a very serious newspaper. How did the evolution happen? Because again, some people would argue that science or religion, that may be difficult to be a scientist in a person of deep faith. By way of an example, there's people like Dr. Francis Collins who actually proves that's so far from that's such an incorrect impression. Maybe it's a stretch, but some people would also say to be in a publishing industry, in a person of deep faith, those may be inconsistent. How did you drive the seriousness of the purpose of publishing, keeping the transparency, but also keeping it open for your faith? I mean, maybe some examples of what worked well and some of the challenges that you encountered.
First, you have to realize that the Swedish newspaper market and the Nordic newspaper market were at this time, we're talking now about mid-90s, late 90s, among the most advanced in the world. Sweden, Norway, Finland, and Japan are the most newspaper readers in the world, or were. About 80-85% of the whole population used to read a newspaper every day. So it was the agenda setter for the political debate, or for the public debate, you can say, and for most things that went on. That's one thing you need to know. The other thing is that I found that of the journalists, maybe a third have their background coming out of the free church movement. A free church movement in our environment, so going back 150 years in time, Sweden was the poorest country in Europe, and the free church movement, together with that, everyone got to go to school from 1848, together with a lot of technical inventions that revolutionized the world, brought Sweden from being one of the poorest countries, I should say also with the labor movement, brought Sweden and Norway and Finland as well, to become some of the kind of among the richest nations on earth, because the whole population was lifted, and media was a very vital part of this in educating the regular people, the blue-collar worker, you could say, of our country. And this was the tradition all the way up to, you could say, recently, when social media has a little bit crushed this structure. This was a serious working place. It was an important institution for the society, but also many journalists were truth seekers. So even if you would say that they were liberal or had a liberal view, yes, they had. So does many people overall, also churchgoers in our part of the world. But it was, once you talked openly and you were sincere with people, they would, you could connect on a, like I say, deep level, but on a personal level. I'd say I didn't find that we were normally fighting each other. We might have different views, sometimes different worldviews, but once you talk to individuals, it worked fine. The problem was that in the public arena, the church and faith had stepped down from being part of the public arena, maybe as late as as early as in the 1950s. And by that, many of the media and the journalists had kind of lost sight of where is church going and what kind of questions does faith bring about into the everyday life of a normal Swede. So I think for many of them, I was the first outspoken Christian who showed up in a public position. And this was, of course, sometimes difficult.
There's the book of Daniel, as God told book of Daniel, it's okay to be part of the world, but do not assimilate into it. So anyway, this is a wonderful example. To move on to halftime, I know you read the book, approximately 2000, 2001. Became a very important part for you, your wife Tina, and the 4 kids, so maybe you can tell us about that experience and how that has changed your life and updated or revised your priorities.
Yeah, so I met Pastor Bill Hybels out of Chicago. I mean, you're in Chicago somewhere. And Chicago and Sweden is very closely related because he used to be the second largest city of Swedes. So Bill Hybels and Willow Creek Church targeted Sweden in their early days when they started to move abroad, and Bill came to my city and I hosted several dinners. And we met a few times, and one of these occasions, I was actually in South Barrington, he gave me the book halftime before flying back to Sweden, and I read it on the sitting there at Scandinavian Airlines, and it was like a gong. It hit a gong within my chest on the message that what do you do with the rest of your life? Thomas, what do you do with all your ambitions or talents or relationships, everything that you are? What do you do with that? And I was at that time, I'd done a few years within media. I could see myself working within media still, but I also saw that there would be a next stage in life where I would do other things, and I couldn't see myself just going into a corporate career or continuing a corporate career, because what could be more challenging than being in the media and a big media company? So a friend of mine, we started to do small seminars in Sweden on this topic of what do you do with the rest of your life, and we handed out several of this book, Bob Buford's book, halftime, from moving from success to significance. And when we met with these older guys who were then in their 60s or maybe up to 70s, all of them started to cry and said, oh, I messed up my life, I messed up my relationships, I just worked, I wanted to make money, I wanted to make a big name of myself and so on. And we just felt that we can't open this Pandora's box. We are too inexperienced. And then I got another friend who's on this call line. His name is Lloyd. We got to meet and we got to talk. And I saw that there are several people out there who are thinking the same way. And there's actually a a model for how to move forward. And I decided that I can't speak about this. I need to put myself under the test, become the guinea pig, so to speak, of this model. So in 2009, it's now 15 years ago, I went over to Dallas and got to experience a 28-hour halftime institute, as it was called, and where I went through the model of where do I come from, where am I at right now, what are my dreams, and how can I move from just been dreaming it into something which is tangible, and also thinking about how actually do you finish well. I wasn't thinking about finishing my life, but how do you finish well under these circumstances? And it evolved into a plan that when I turned 50, which was then in 2012, I would do a cut of my career and maybe do something differently. This was a pretty abrupt plan. It was like doing at least a 90 degrees turn. Maybe that's nothing you would recommend to someone. Maybe it's better to do smaller adjustments, but this was my plans. I put a date, that was the only thing I knew, 31st of December 2012. And I went back to the main owner of the Gothenburg Post, who I then had worked with for 12 years, and said that after 2012, I won't be with you anymore. Don't count on me. We have grown, we are growing, all of that, but don't count on me. I'll do something differently. And then my old friend Lloyd, and I know Lloyd and Linda on this call. Linda is his wife.
Yep.
And Lloyd showed up at the airport before leaving Dallas and said, "Can I coach you?" And I had never had a coach. I didn't know really what that meant, so I probably said yes because I was hurrying to the aircraft. But Lloyd called me up pretty soon after I got back home to Sweden. I remember this day so clearly because I was sitting on the upstairs when he called and we had a conversation, and he threw two questions at me, which was, what does your wife Tina say, and how do you want to live your lives going on? Do you want to live them separately, overlapping, or partly overlapping? And I remember hanging up that call, it was not the phone, it was a mobile phone. I did. And I went downstairs to while Tina was in the kitchen. I said, I got two questions. And to her, this was like a bomb exploded in the middle of the city. It's not in the city, in the kitchen. What am I included was like her question. She found that our lives had always been about me, about my career, about my journey, and that I was so busy doing things, buying or companies or restructuring or whatever. But from this day on, this was a process where she was included and where she mattered, and her life became like at the centerpiece of our family's journey from there on. And that meant a huge difference to the rest of our lives, I would say. Yeah. So, yeah.
Yeah, Lloyd Reeve, as you know, he was my coach during halftime, and very, very impactful in an individual and just an amazing person. Tell me about the mission work in Africa and Europe. I know you and Tina do that together, which was part of the halftime roadmap, if you will, I believe.
Well, if I continue on these questions, because I think Tina's journey is more interesting than mine, actually.
Oh, please go ahead.
So what happened? Yeah, what happened was that we continued on this, and in the end of December 2012, I stepped down of the CEO position. I then decided that I would try to go into 50% work, 50 for working with missions or pro bono work, and then 50% stay in the business life. But Tina's journey, I'll come back to that, but Tina's journey was that suddenly she found that there was space both in our marriage and family life to do new things for her and to step outside home. She'd been something which is very unusual in Swedish circumstances. She was a stay-at-home mom for many years with our kids. And she started to look for where can I serve? And she started first to serve with going to older people who were like 90 and above to go and see them because they were so lonely in many cases. So that was the first thing that she did. So then she placed herself at our church care ministry, And after, for you who know European history, in 2013, 2014, 2015, we got a massive influx of immigrants from Middle East, from Northern Africa, and also from Southern Africa. And many of these people came to our church for help. So she found herself being placed in the most explosive part of what happened in Sweden at that time, because we took the most immigrants per capita in all of Europe during that time. And our church just transformed during this year. And so she headed up this work called Manna, and she still does that. So she went from being a stay-at-home mom, putting herself or finding herself in a place where it just became in the focus of everything. So when our church was inaugurated 3 months ago, and we had the minister of, what do you say, civil affairs or interior, or whatever it's called in the US, the only thing he mentioned that he knew about the church was the work that she does, which is called Manna, because he said, we in the government are so proud of Manna. That's fantastic to hear from a minister and the Swedish government. So that happened. But at the same time, we started to do things together. So I was 50-50. I became the president of the World Association of Newspapers and News Publishers, and traveled partly around the world in the name of press freedom. But I've taken pilot licenses, so we started to do work for Mission Aviation Fellowship, and ended up 3 times. First in Papua New Guinea, but then in Arnhem Land, Australia, working with MEF. I never got to fly for them because it takes 4-year terms. We couldn't stay out that long. But I worked in culture, management, and strategy issues. Tina got to work with all the spouses, which was maybe the most needed thing, because out there in the bush, the pressure on the spouses, not the job holders, is massive. Taking care of the kids, growing families, education, and so on. So again, she found herself in the middle of something that was really needed. But I think this thing that we did together really grew us together also as a couple, and deepened our love and friendship and just the way of understanding of each other being out there. And I think it changed our lives forever.
Well, I've met Tina a couple of times. She is excuse me, amazing lady. There's so many more questions I'm looking at. I do want to get to the audience as well. Maybe two things to finish, and again, I have a bunch of others if there's no questions from the group. But you've talked about detox in your books. Detoxing, maybe what does that mean? And maybe just a quick summary of that, Tomas.
Well, I think that being CEO, finding yourself in that kind of environment where there is a lot of affluence, there's a lot of success, there's a lot of power, there's a lot of people, support people all around, which filters out the bad stuff, makes you thinking that you know it, you are a little bit better, and you're worth it. And I think these issues become intoxicating. It intoxicates your brain, your mind, and the way, your ability to see yourself clearly. And I think having done this journey of being in that environment of success, but also going out of that environment and finding yourself in the middle of refugees, also needy people in Papua New Guinea, or working with people who have given up all of their lives and going out in the bush as missionaries. It clears your mind, and you get to see yourself in a better perspective. And I think for many of us who've been in leadership positions in big organizations, we need to be aware of that power corrupts, and absolute power absolutely corrupts. And that you think that you are resilient to this, but no one is. I think also the journey I had after I stepped out, when the media industry collapsed, and my own company 4 years later ended up in Chapter 11, and when they had to find the scapegoat, they found me. So I was scrutinized on Swedish television on equivalent of 60 minutes. They even did a play on me in 2017, and 10,000 people came to watch it at the City Theater. When you are scrutinized and when you're kind of dragged through the mud, that's also very healthy for how you view yourself. You can easily start to think yourself that you are a bad person as well. But going through this, and you learn that success very easily corrupts you when things go against you. That really shapes your character. And I think being able to go through that and see yourself more clearly, and also making sure that bitterness, anger, feelings of revenge doesn't get rooted in yourself. I think that's the biggest asset I have today, and to contribute with to leaders overall.
Yeah, those feelings certainly are not fruit of the Spirit. Last question again, and hopefully there's questions from the audience, but I mean, the outlook for the world can seem pretty dark, especially if you look at the news. How do you look at reasons for hope? I mean, first of all, do you see them? And if yes, how do you think about it, and how do you communicate it to your family and friends and to others?
Yeah, the outlook is certainly bleak, and I think today is a sad day. I don't know if you picked up in the U.S. that Alexei Navalny, the opposition guy in Russia, is dead today, and I think this is something that speaks a lot to us on the severity of how things are, and also with having the Ukraine border not too far away from my country, it also speaks to us. But still, we need to know that God is in control. He has and His kingdom is breaking through. And I think is there something we as believers need to stand up for today, but also that it comes shining through our life, is there's hope. There's hope because God will restore everything, and He will. There are solutions to all these problems that we are facing. And when we take an eternal perspective, looking beyond our lives, His kingdom will put everything right again. And I think that's why, like the early Christians did in the Empire of Rome, which was also a very difficult time, but they were there. They took care of the least of these. In their microcosmos, you could say they worked for a better world, and we need to do the same thing. And we need not to be afraid of what's going on, even if it looks dark, because God's kingdom is of another setting than what this world is. And I think we need to communicate that, and we need to work for that, and trust the Lord on this one, because we can't trust any human factors at this day and age to solve it. That comes for the climate crisis as well, which is of course hanging as some sort of sword. The more north you live, the more you're effective on it. Maybe the more south as well.
It just reminds me why I enjoy speaking with you often. But our first question from cyberspace: with the ever-changing media landscape around the world, how do we bring journalism back to the center?
Well, I think journalism is bringing itself back to its core roots, which is truth-seeking, scrutinizing, maybe also being proactive in its way of working. And I see tendencies of this. I think we need to separate between many of the media companies, because media companies are set up to work, in most part, for a profit and for building its structures. But journalism in itself is, I think, is rooted in actually finding truth, finding ways forward. And I think somehow, sometime, and many times, it has lost its core essence in this shift from legacy media, where everything was very stable, and then you got social media coming around with the global giants of the tech platforms, and this is kind of everyone is just tied into some sort of fast cycle, and it doesn't work. And this is where there is now I see this what do you call it? Not revival, but work within the media circles of how do we get back the trust? How do we get people to trust us again? And this is going on, and this is a global thing going on.
This is unusually, normally, Mimi Murley would ask the first question from the from the family, but we have her husband. Bob Murley is going to ask the first in-person question. Bob and I started Faith at Work, and there's 5 of us now, including Mimi, Rick, Lucy Bickford, and Stu Dixon. This is a small group of us, the organized, but the first question is coming from Bob Murley.
Thank you very much for being with us today. George Shultz, speaking of trust in the media, George Shultz used to often say that his favorite phrase was, "Trust is the coin of the realm." And I'm wondering, in this day and age, where do you go to find news that you can trust? What are the places that you find you can find trust in when you're reading them in the media today?
Something besides the Bible.
Well, you might not like what I'm going to say, but I have a couple of favorite magazines, editorial staffs, or individual journalists that I like. I read The Economist, for example. It's usually seen as very liberal in the US, but The Economist is a fantastic news magazine and gives to me a very credible view on Earth. But I think the big shift is also that I don't necessarily just go to one source. I go to many sources, and by that I get a very mixed picture from where I can try to draw my own conclusions on what's happening in the world, especially on the Israel-Hamas thing. This is very important because everyone seems to be biased on this one. There are also it's fascinating. I have to tell you this because in my home country, one of the most secular countries on earth, what has happened within the last 5 years is a very prominent journalist have come to faith. Cultural editors, which used to be the propaganda speakers for the secular modernist that has been significant for Sweden for the last 50 years. This has totally turned around within the last 5 years. And suddenly they have become proclaimers of faith and Jesus Christ in a way that today you don't know what's up and down because this is so unimaginable for us who has been at faith nearly all our lives. This has nothing to do with trust in media now, but what I'm saying is there's a lot of turmoil going on in journalists, and going back to where you are at in Chicago in the US, you got to find your ways to build a framework that works where you get your media from. But don't trust just one news source. Don't trust Fox or CNN or just the New York Times, because your media in the US is very polarized compared to many other places.
Thank you. That's a wonderful answer, and I very much share your view on that. Thank you.
Any other questions from here? Our communications director for the church, Susan.
Hello. I've been following that same arc of different people coming to faith who are in the media, and I'm just wondering, in regards to what we read, what books would you suggest to someone who's trying to share their faith with an unbeliever?
Well, it's too bad that you guys just speak English, because there are many other good authors out around the world who speaks other languages, so I could have recommended you some Swedish. But you have very good authors as well. I think that, let's see, what's his name? The guy from New York Times, who's also a...
David Brooks?
Yes, David Brooks. David Brooks is a fantastic author. He has a book called Second Mountain. He was born as a Jewish person. He then became an atheist, and he moved into Catholicism. And his faith journey is amazing to follow in his books. I think also talking about faith, halftime, but also coming to faith, Falling Upward by Richard Rohr is a very good book to read. Yeah, these are books that come to my mind right now.
By the way, Susan told me yesterday, I've forgotten, she's married to a Swede as well. So I asked her to ask the question in Swedish, but I guess she wasn't as comfortable doing that in Swedish. But is that question maybe? Oh, sorry, yeah.
Hello. I want to start with a compliment to Swedish culture. Because, you know, when my daughter was growing up, she has two favorite books. One was The Adventure of Niels with the Wild Geese, and the second was Carlson. Now I want to move to the different question. Like you said that you grew, they had the church that grew and became twice bigger. That's how I heard it. Mm-hmm. And I love that we're talking about people coming to faith. Can you tell us what the local church can do to bring people in the local community to faith?
What I spoke about when it grew, it was the church building size, not the number of attendance, but I have to say this first. What has happened to our church is that it's gone from a older, middle-class, white church into a total transnational, multicultural church with many colors, languages, and everything. And it's because of this influx of immigrants, and because many of them are believers. You know, the center of Christianity has moved down south of the equator. So when they come as refugees, they come to our churches because that's a natural place to go to. When it comes to involvement, I think, so we can see now only, we have been in the news site for 4 months, and I've been spending the last few days this week having lunches with the guy who's in charge of the community, the woman who's chairman of another church, and I met some CEOs for other companies just having lunches about our new church building, because it's such in prime location, that it's visible for everyone. And right across the river that goes right through my city is the City Opera, which we have formed a joint agreement. So when they don't have space for another performance, they put it in our church. That's one way of cooperating. We're also having Polestar, if you know Polestar, which is the Swedish competitor to Tesla. They are putting up their global headquarters right next to us, and we are talking about using joint locations for when we need more extra space. They will come into us, so we will go to them. So just by having this involvement interaction with the city and the city's need is, I think, the way to operate, to lower the threshold for people to come walking in. Before we moved, and now we're talking, go back 6 months, the church audience will pretty much look like the audience that goes to the symphony orchestra in town. It's white, middle-aged, and above 60. Today, it's much younger population, all colors, 40 languages, and they come into our church. And just by moving, lowering the threshold, opening up the doors, something has happened. And every Sunday now, at least, 3/4 of the seats are filled. We also have a school in our church where you can go and take, it's called folkhögskola in Swedish. It's like a second chance school where you can go if you kind of have dropped out of the school system, or you came from another country and didn't fill the requirements, you can go to this school. We have 200 students with all colors from many nations on earth that goes to this school, and they come every day. So just by being open, being part of the community, changes the whole scenery for the church. And I think this is God's plan.
Tomas, we can go on forever. Look forward to our next catch-up, but maybe a softball question, maybe a quick update on your 4 kids. Hopefully they're watching this as well. I'm sure they're proud of their dad, but maybe their names and what you're currently doing, and then we'll finish with the Lord's Prayer.
Well, if they're proud with their dad, I don't know, but we talk a lot. So we have Johannes, who's the oldest, 31 years old, works as a management consultant, lives in Stockholm. I have Benjamin, who's the second, he's 29 years old, lives also in Stockholm. He's a film producer. And the number 3, she's here in Gothenburg. She studies HR, Lydia. And then the last one, but not the least one, which is Esther, and she has just started to study law at the oldest university in Sweden, which is called Uppsala. Doing well, no grandchildren yet, but we don't know when they come, but that's my family. They get the link to this.
Yeah. Are they all followers, or they're in the process of becoming followers?
I think they all have their faith. They don't run down the doors of any church, but they're all followers. They all have their own faith in their way, which is fascinating to follow. And I'm so confident that God has us all in His hands, and that He loves us all, no matter if you go every Sunday to church or not.
I look forward to meeting them as well. Thank you for being here. Thanks for coming here. So as we normally do, maybe for the Lord's Prayer. Okay? Thank you. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thy is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. Thank you, Tomas. Best have a wonderful weekend. Thank you.